Millionaire CEO took everything from her after the divorce, and she didn't beg. What happened next shocked everyone. You're stealing my work. Every design that made your company famous came from my mind, from my hands. Damien Ashford stood in the doorway of his home office, his 6'2" frame imposing in that perfectly tailored Armani suit. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks with deliberate precision. That gesture Vivian had learned meant he was about to say something that would shatter her world. I'm not stealing anything, Vivian. I'm protecting my family's legacy. There's a difference. But those designs are mine. My concepts, my innovations, my vision. And yet somehow, his voice was ice cold, clinical, like he was discussing a failed business transaction rather than destroying his wife. My name is on all the documentation. My name is on every patent, every copyright, every award. Legally, you were just an employee, a well-compensated one, but still just an employee. Vivian felt the air leave her lungs. Just an employee. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of building an architectural empire together. 8 years of her pouring her genius into designs while he took the credit because she loved him and thought they were partners. You can't do this. It's already done. Damien picked up his briefcase, preparing to walk out of their Tribeca penthouse, out of their marriage, out of her life. My lawyers have drawn up divorce papers. You'll find them very generous, considering the circumstances. There's also a non-disclosure agreement. You won't speak to the press about your supposed contributions to the company. In return, you'll receive a settlement that will keep you comfortable for several years. And if I refuse, then my lawyers will destroy you. They'll paint you as a bitter ex-wife making delusional claims about work you weren't capable of producing. Your name will be mud in this industry. No firm will touch you. You'll be finished before you start. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. I do hope you'll be reasonable about this, Vivian, for your own sake. You're a talented woman, but you're not in my league. You never were. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us. That was 5 years ago, and Damien Ashford was about to learn just how catastrophically wrong he was. Have you ever had someone take credit for your work? Have you ever been betrayed by the one person who was supposed to protect you? Have you ever been told you weren't good enough, right before someone stole everything you created? This isn't just a story about divorce. This is about a woman who built an empire with her bare hands, only to watch her husband put his name on everything, discard her like damaged goods, and tell the world she was nobody. But here's what Damien didn't know. Vivian wasn't going to disappear quietly, and what she built in those 5 years would bring him to his knees. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever wanted to prove someone wrong, you need to hear this story. Hit that subscribe button right now because this comeback is absolutely legendary. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Heavy cream cardstock with gold embossed lettering, the kind of expensive stationery that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. Vivian Cross held it between her fingers in her corner office, on the 45th floor of a Manhattan high-rise, feeling the weight of irony pressing down on her chest. You are cordially invited to the grand opening of the Meridian Tower, Manhattan's newest architectural jewel, designed by Ashford and Sterling Development. Ashford, that name still had the power to make her breath catch, even after 5 years of separation, 5 years of silence, 5 years of rebuilding herself from absolute nothing into something he never imagined she could become. You're not actually considering going, are you? Nora Chen stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, the Manhattan skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the late afternoon sun. Nora had been there through everything. The devastating divorce, the financial struggles, the nights when Vivian wanted to give up. She was more than a business partner. She was the sister Vivian had never had. Vivian set the invitation down on her glass desk with deliberate care. At 38, she had mastered the art of appearing completely unaffected, even when her heart was racing. Why wouldn't I go? It's the social event of the season. Everyone who matters in this industry will be there. Everyone including your ex-husband who destroyed you and took everything you'd built together. Everything he thought he'd built. Vivian's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Damien always did have a selective memory about who actually created what. Nora moved closer, her heels clicking on the polished hardwood floor. The setting sun cast long shadows across the office, across the architectural models displayed on custom shelving, across the framed magazine covers featuring Vivian's award-winning designs. Viv, I just don't want to see you hurt again. You've worked so hard to rebuild. I haven't rebuilt anything. Vivian picked up the invitation again, studying the architectural rendering of the Meridian Tower printed in miniature. Even from this small image, she could see the flaws. The way the glass facade would create heat retention issues on the eastern exposure. How the lobby positioning would create traffic flow problems during peak hours. The structural weaknesses that would reveal themselves within 5 years. She'd taught Damien everything he knew about architectural design, back when they were partners in every sense of the word. Back when she believed that love and shared dreams were enough to build a life on. I've built something entirely new, she continued. Something better. Something that's completely mine. And he can't take this from you. No. Vivian's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. He can't. She thought back to 5 years ago, to the day her world ended in their Tribeca penthouse kitchen. To the moment she learned that the man she loved, the man she'd built an empire with, saw her as nothing more than a disposable asset. An employee who'd outlived her usefulness. But that was before she'd clawed her way back from rock bottom. Before she'd proven that she was the real genius behind Ashford Development's success. Before she'd beaten Damien at his own game so thoroughly, so publicly, that the entire architecture world was still talking about it. The memory pulled her back, pulled her to the beginning, to when everything was possible and love felt real. Vivian had met Damien Ashford 9 years ago, in her final year of architecture school at Columbia. She was 29, older than most of her classmates because she'd worked for 6 years after high school to save money for college. She was the daughter of a carpenter and a librarian from a small town in Vermont, someone who understood that nothing in life was given. Everything had to be earned through sweat and determination and refusing to quit when things got hard. Damien was different. He'd grown up in Manhattan, the son and grandson of architects, heir to a respectable mid-sized firm that had been building elegant, traditional structures for 3 generations. He was handsome in that effortless way of men born into privilege. Tall, with dark hair and ice blue eyes, always dressed in clothes that cost more than Vivian's monthly rent. He'd come to Columbia to give a guest lecture on classical architectural principles. Vivian had raised her hand during the question and answer session. Your grandfather's work is technically perfect, she'd said, but don't you think it lacks innovation? Architecture should push boundaries, should reimagine what's possible. Otherwise, we're just repeating the past. The lecture hall had gone silent. Students didn't typically challenge guest speakers, especially not ones from prominent architectural families. But Vivian had never been good at staying silent when she had something to say. Damien had studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. What's your name? Vivian Cross. Well, Vivian Cross. Why don't you show me what boundary-pushing architecture looks like? She'd brought her portfolio to his office the next week. Designs that incorporated sustainable materials in unexpected ways. Structures that maximize natural light while minimizing energy consumption. Buildings that were functional and beautiful and completely unlike anything in the Ashford Development catalog. Damien had looked through every page in silence. When he finally spoke, there was something new in his voice. Excitement. Possibility. This is incredible. This is exactly what our firm needs. Fresh vision. Innovation. He'd looked up at her with those ice blue eyes. How would you like a job? That had been the beginning. She'd joined Ashford Development as a junior architect, but within 6 months, she was the creative force behind their most ambitious projects. She'd designed something revolutionary. Damien would present it to clients with his family name and polished charm, and together they'd win commission after commission. The professional partnership had turned romantic over late nights in the office, over shared Chinese takeout and debates about form versus function, over the electricity that sparked between them when their hands touched over a blueprint. Damien had proposed after a year, in front of the first building they'd designed together. A sustainable office complex in Brooklyn that had won 3 industry awards, all listing Damien Ashford as the primary architect. Marry me, he'd said. Let's build something bigger than buildings. Let's build a life. She'd said yes without hesitation. She loved him. She believed in their partnership. And she didn't care that his name was on the awards and the articles while hers appeared in small print, if at all. They were a team. What did it matter whose name was bigger? For 3 years, their marriage had been good. Great, even. Vivian designed, Damien presented. Ashford Development grew from a respectable family firm into one of Manhattan's most sought-after architectural companies. They bought the Tribeca penthouse. They traveled to Paris and Tokyo and Dubai, studying architecture and gathering inspiration. They talked about having children someday, about building a legacy together. But slowly, so gradually that Vivian didn't notice until it was too late, things began to change. Damien's family had never really accepted her. His grandmother, the matriarch of the Ashford dynasty, made no secret of her disappointment that Damien had married a carpenter's daughter from Vermont instead of someone from their social circle. His mother was polite but distant. His father asked pointed questions about her background, her education, whether she really understood the world they inhabited. And then, Margot Sterling entered their lives. She was everything Vivian wasn't. Manhattan-born, hotel heiress, society pages regular. She moved through their world with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to prove she belonged. She appeared at charity galas and industry events, always perfectly dressed, always saying exactly the right thing to exactly the right people. Damien had mentioned her casually at first. Margot Sterling's family is interested in a hotel renovation. Margot had some interesting thoughts on the Palmer project. Margot's hosting a dinner party. We should attend. Vivian had designed a stunning concept for the Sterling hotel renovation. Damien had presented it. Margot's family had been so impressed they'd invited Damien to join their foundation board. More opportunities followed. More connections. More evenings when Damien came home late from meetings or dinners or events that Margot had organized. Vivian had pushed down the unease. She told herself she was being paranoid. Damien loved her. They were partners. She was imagining problems that didn't exist. And then came that Tuesday evening, 6 months after Margot Sterling had entered their orbit. Vivian had arrived home early from a site visit, excited to tell Damien about a new sustainable material she'd discovered. The penthouse was empty. His car was gone. She'd poured herself a glass of wine and settled in to work on designs for their next big pitch. Damien had walked in 3 hours later, his tie loosened, smelling faintly of expensive perfume that wasn't Vivian's. "We need to talk," he'd said, and Vivian's world had begun to crumble. This marriage isn't working anymore. Damien had stood in the kitchen, not quite meeting her eyes. His hand moving to adjust those platinum cufflinks, and that gesture she'd learned meant he'd already made up his mind about something. "What are you talking about?" Vivian had set down her wineglass carefully, her architect's hands suddenly trembling. "Damien, we're fine. We're happy. You might be happy. I'm not." The words had hit like a physical blow. "I don't understand. If something's wrong, we can fix it. We can talk about it. There's nothing to talk about. I want a divorce." The kitchen had seemed to tilt around her. The marble countertops, the custom cabinets, the view of Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything they'd built together. Everything she'd thought was solid and permanent and real. Is there someone else? Damien had at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Margot and I have grown close over the past few months. Her family's connections, her understanding of our world. She fits into this life in a way that you never quite have. I don't fit." Vivian's voice had risen despite her efforts to stay calm. "I built this life with you. Every successful project, every award, every innovation that put Ashford Development on the map came from me. You helped in the early days, I'll give you that. But Ashford Development has grown beyond those modest beginnings. It needs a different kind of partner now. Someone who understands the social dynamics of this level of success. Someone like Margot Sterling. Margot was born into this world. She speaks the language, knows the players, understands what it takes to maintain and grow this kind of success. You've always been playing catch-up, trying to fit in where you don't belong." Each word was a carefully aimed knife, cutting precisely where it would hurt most, attacking her background, her origins, everything she'd worked so hard to overcome. "I don't belong." Vivian had felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. "I've spent 8 years building this company with you. I've created every innovative design that made Ashford Development famous. I belong here because I earned my place here. That's the thing, Vivian." Damien had poured himself a scotch, his movements casual, like they were discussing a minor business matter rather than destroying their marriage. "You did help build the company, but legally your contributions are murky at best. What does that mean?" "It means that when I reviewed our contracts and paperwork with my attorney, we discovered something interesting. Your name isn't on any of the patents or copyrights for our designs. All of the intellectual property belongs to Ashford Development. All of it belongs to me." Vivian had gone very still. "That's not possible. Those are my designs." "Are they?" Damien had taken a slow sip of scotch. "Because according to every legal document, every filing, every official record, I'm the architect of record." My name is on everything. You were an employee. A valued employee, certainly, but just an employee nonetheless. The betrayal had stolen her breath. All those late nights when she'd worked on designs while Damien was out networking. All those innovative concepts she'd created and handed over for him to present. All those buildings she'd envisioned, all those problems she'd solved, all those boundaries she'd pushed. And he'd made sure that legally she had no claim to any of it. You planned this. Her voice had been barely a whisper. This wasn't just about Margot. You've been setting me up to take everything. I've been protecting my family's legacy. There's a difference. My lawyers have advised me that you have no legal claim to any of the intellectual property. The company, the patents, the reputation, it all belongs to Ashford Development. It all belongs to me. Vivian had gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. You're stealing my life's work. I'm ending a marriage that's no longer serving either of us. The divorce papers include a very generous settlement, enough to keep you comfortable while you figure out your next steps. But there is one condition. Of course there is. A non-disclosure agreement. You won't speak publicly about your supposed role in Ashford Development's success. You won't make claims about designing our award-winning projects. You won't attempt to damage the company's reputation or my professional standing. And if I refuse, Damien's expression had hardened into something cold and calculating, someone Vivian didn't recognize at all. Then my legal team will systematically destroy your credibility. They'll present evidence that you were administrative support, not a creative force. They'll find colleagues who'll testify that I was always the visionary while you were, at best, a competent assistant. They'll paint you as a bitter, delusional ex-wife trying to claim credit for work she wasn't capable of producing. He'd moved toward the door, picking up the briefcase he'd set down when he arrived. By the time they're finished, no architecture firm in this city will touch you. You'll be unhireable, Vivian. Your name will be synonymous with false claims and professional dishonesty. You'll never work in this industry again. So my choices are stay silent and disappear, or fight back and be destroyed. Those are your choices, yes. I suggest you take the settlement and move on quietly. You're a talented woman. I'm sure you'll find something else to do with your life. Just not architecture. Vivian had stared at this man she'd loved, this man she'd built an empire with, this man who was casually dismantling everything she'd worked for as if it meant nothing. What about us? What about the promises we made to each other? Damien had paused at the door. I'm in love with Margot. We're planning to announce our engagement next month after the divorce is filed. Her family's already discussing a merger between Ashford Development and Sterling Properties. This is what's best for everyone. Best for you, you mean? Best for my career. Best for the company. Best for my future. You were a good partner for a time, Vivian, but I've outgrown what you can offer. With that, he'd walked out. She'd heard his footsteps crossing the marble foyer, heard the elevator doors open and close, heard the sound of her marriage ending in the mechanical whir of a descending elevator. Vivian had stood alone in that kitchen for a long time. The kitchen in the penthouse her designs had paid for, even if his name was on the deed. Surrounded by the life she'd helped create, that was being taken away as if she'd never mattered at all. She'd thought about crying, thought about screaming, thought about throwing her wine glass at those expensive abstract paintings on the wall. Instead, she'd walked to her private study, the one room Damien never entered because he found it cluttered with her sketches and models and creative chaos. She'd opened her laptop and begun methodically copying every design file, every concept sketch, every innovation she'd ever created. If he thought he could erase her, he was wrong. She'd make sure she had evidence of everything. The divorce proceedings had moved with brutal efficiency. Richard Morrison, the attorney Vivian hired with the last of her savings, had reviewed the settlement paperwork with grim resignation. Legally, you don't have much ground to stand on. Damien was smart. Every patent, every copyright, every official document lists him as the architect of record. You were employed by Ashford Development, but there's no paper trail establishing you as a creative partner. But I created those designs. Vivian had sat in Richard's office, watching her life be reduced to legal terminology and contractual obligations. Everyone at the firm knew I was the real innovator. Can you prove it? Can you find colleagues who'll testify to that, knowing it means going against Damien Ashford and likely ending their own careers in this industry? Vivian had closed her eyes. No, she couldn't. Damien held too much power, had too many connections. Anyone who spoke up for her would be blacklisted just as thoroughly as she was about to be. The settlement he's offering is substantial. $3 million. That's enough to start over, go back to school for something else, build a different kind of life. I don't want a different life. I want to be an architect. Then you'll have to build that career from scratch without being able to claim any of your previous work. Richard had looked at her with genuine sympathy. Vivian, I have to be honest. The non-disclosure agreement is ironclad. If you sign it, you're giving up the right to ever publicly claim credit for anything you designed at Ashford Development. But if you don't sign it, Damien's legal team will bury you. They have unlimited resources and a vested interest in protecting their client's reputation, so I'm supposed to just disappear. Let him steal everything and move on like none of it mattered. I'm saying you need to think carefully about whether fighting this battle is worth the cost. Vivian had read through the divorce papers, feeling her heart break with each page. The marriage was dissolved. The settlement was paid. The non-disclosure agreement was executed. And Vivian Cross, soon to be no longer Vivian Ashford, would exit the architecture world as if she'd never been part of it at all. She'd asked Richard for time to think. She'd taken the papers back to the small studio apartment in Queens she'd rented with what little money she had left. The contrast to the Tribeca penthouse was devastating. 400 square feet instead of 3,000. A view of a brick wall instead of Manhattan's skyline. Furniture from thrift stores instead of custom-designed pieces. This was her life now. This was what happened when you trusted the wrong person, when you let love blind you to reality, when you built something beautiful with someone who saw you as disposable. Vivian had sat on her second-hand couch, staring at the divorce papers, feeling the full weight of what she'd lost crushing down on her. The marriage, the career, the reputation, the life. Everything gone because she'd made the mistake of believing in partnership, in love, in a future that had never been as real as she'd thought. She should sign the papers, take the money, walk away, find something else to do with her life, just like Damien had suggested. But as she sat there in that tiny apartment, something shifted inside her. A spark of defiance, of rage, of absolute refusal to let this be the end of her story. Damien thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully erased her contribution to Ashford Development's success. He thought she'd take the settlement and disappear quietly, just another ex-wife who'd been traded in for a newer model. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Vivian had set the divorce papers aside. She'd opened her laptop and begun researching. Patent law, copyright procedures, how to start a business under a corporate entity, how to build an architecture firm from absolute scratch, how to compete in an industry that thought she was nobody. She would sign the papers eventually, but not yet, not until she'd used every day of their legal marriage to her advantage, to build something Damien would never see coming. If he wanted to play hardball, she'd show him what a real fight looked like. The first few months after Damien moved out were the hardest of Vivian's life. Harder than putting herself through architecture school while working 3 jobs. Harder than proving herself in a male-dominated industry. Harder than anything she'd ever endured. The settlement money Damien had offered would have made things easier. But Vivian refused to sign the papers, refused to take his money, refused to agree to the terms that would erase her from the story of her own success. So she survived on her rapidly dwindling savings while she figured out her next move. The architecture firm she'd once been courted by suddenly had no openings. The colleagues who'd praised her work stopped returning her calls. The industry that had celebrated Ashford Development's innovations had apparently decided that Damien alone deserved the credit. Vivian took a job as a barista at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, 5 days a week, making lattes for the same kind of Manhattan professional she used to be. The humiliation of it burned. Every customer who looked through her like she was invisible. Every complicated drink order barked like she was stupid. Every pittance of a tip that still mattered because she was counting every dollar. But she needed to eat, needed to pay rent, needed to survive long enough to execute the plan that was forming in her mind. At night, after her shifts, she designed. She filled notebook after notebook with concepts, innovations, solutions to architectural problems she noticed around the city. She studied every building she passed, analyzing what worked and what didn't, training her eye to see opportunities where others saw limitations. And she researched patent databases, copyright law, business registration procedures, the mechanics of building a company so thoroughly separated from her old life that Damien would never see it coming. 3 months after Damien moved out, Vivian filed paperwork to legally change her name back to her maiden name, Vivian Cross. A clean break from the Ashford identity, a fresh start that would let her build something new without the weight of her failed marriage attached to it. She registered a business entity, Cross Architectural Innovations, a company name that meant nothing to anyone, that had no connection to Ashford Development, that could grow and evolve without anyone linking it to Damien's discarded ex-wife. The first client came through a flyer she'd posted at the coffee shop. A young couple in Brooklyn wanted to renovate their brownstone. They had a tiny budget, barely enough to cover materials, certainly not enough to hire one of the established firms they'd initially approached. Vivian met with them on her day off, portfolio in hand, prepared to explain that she was a new architect trying to build her reputation. But when she showed them her designs, concepts she'd created but could never claim credit for, their eyes had widened with genuine excitement. "This is incredible." The wife, Melissa, had flipped through page after page. "You understand exactly what we're trying to do. All the other architects wanted to give us generic renovations. You're actually listening to how we want to live in this space." "I can't pay much," Vivian had admitted. "I'm just starting out. This would be as much for my portfolio as for your home." The husband, Jason, had looked at his wife, then back at Vivian. "When can you start?" That brownstone renovation became the foundation of everything. Vivian poured every ounce of creativity into it. She maximized the limited space with innovative storage solutions. She repositioned windows to flood the rooms with natural light. She chose sustainable materials that were both beautiful and functional. She created something that transformed a dark, cramped brownstone into a light-filled, perfectly designed home. And she documented everything. Photographs from every angle, detailed notes on every design choice, video of the construction process. When it was finished, she filed for design patents on the 3 most innovative elements. They were hers, legally, provably, undeniably hers. Melissa and Jason had been thrilled with the result. They'd posted photos on social media, tagged Cross Architectural, raved to their friends about this amazing new architect who'd transformed their home for a fraction of what the big firms charged. 2 more clients came from those referrals, then 3 more. Then a small restaurant in Carroll Gardens that wanted a renovation. Each project was small, almost invisible to the larger architecture world. But each one let Vivian build her portfolio, establish her style, create a body of work that belonged entirely to her. She worked herself to exhaustion. Barista shifts in the morning, client meetings and site visits in the afternoon, design work late into the night. She lived on coffee and takeout and the fierce determination to prove that she was more than Damien's discarded employee. 6 months after the separation, society pages announced Damien and Margot's engagement. The photos showed them at some charity gala, Margot's hand displaying a diamond the size of a marble, both of them smiling like they'd won the lottery. The announcement mentioned the upcoming merger of Ashford Development and Sterling Properties, creating a real estate and architecture powerhouse that would reshape Manhattan's skyline. Vivian had stared at those photos for a long time. This was the life Damien had chosen. The society wife, the family connections, the empire built on a foundation that Vivian had created but could never claim. She'd closed her laptop and gone back to designing, back to building, back to creating the future that would eventually make Damien regret every choice he'd made. 18 months after the separation, Cross Architectural had completed 15 residential projects and won its first commercial commission. A boutique hotel in Brooklyn, nothing massive, but enough to prove Vivian could handle larger scope work. The hotel owner had seen her brownstone renovations and been impressed by her innovative use of limited space. "Your vision is exactly what we need," the owner had said. "All the big firms wanted to give us cookie-cutter designs. You understand that every space has unique potential." The boutique hotel project was Vivian's breakout moment. She designed something that maximized natural light, incorporated sustainable materials, and created an atmosphere that felt both luxurious and welcoming. When it opened, design blogs took notice. Small mentions at first, but mentions nonetheless. Emerging architect brings fresh vision to Brooklyn boutique hotel. Cross Architectural Innovations creating buzz with sustainable design approach. Who is Vivian Cross and why isn't she more famous? Damien wouldn't have seen those small blog posts. His world was Manhattan penthouse projects and international commissions, not Brooklyn boutique hotels. But Vivian was building, brick by brick, design by design, a reputation that was entirely her own. 2 years after the separation, Vivian received an invitation to speak on a panel about sustainable architecture. It was a small conference, nothing prestigious, but it was industry recognition. Proof that Cross Architectural was becoming known for innovation and environmental consciousness. She'd stood on that panel, answering questions about her design philosophy, her approach to sustainability, her vision for architecture's future. And she'd been careful, so careful, to never mention Ashford Development, to never hint at her past, to present herself as exactly what her business registration claimed, a new architect with fresh ideas. But after the panel, an older architect had approached her. His name was Marcus Webb, and he'd been in the industry for 40 years. "Your work reminds me of someone," he'd said, studying her face. "There was an architect at Ashford Development years ago. The designs coming out of that firm had a similar innovative quality. Then suddenly it stopped. Their work became more conservative. Safe. I always wondered what happened to the person who'd been pushing those boundaries." Vivian had kept her expression carefully neutral. "Sometimes people move on to new opportunities." Marcus had nodded slowly. "Sometimes they do, and sometimes they get erased from the story they helped create." He'd handed her his card. "If you ever want to collaborate on a project, call me." Real talent deserves recognition, regardless of whose name got put on the work in the past. It was the closest anyone had come to acknowledging the truth, that somewhere in Vivian's past was a body of uncredited work, that the innovation Marcus had noticed at Ashford Development had come from the same mind now creating buzz as Vivian Cross. But the non-disclosure agreement still hung over her head. She couldn't confirm Marcus's suspicions, couldn't claim credit for those old designs, could only keep building forward, creating new work that would eventually overshadow anything she'd done before. 3 years after the separation, Cross Architectural had grown to 8 employees, young architects who believed in Vivian's vision, who wanted to be part of something innovative and meaningful. The office was still small, nothing like Ashford Development's sleek headquarters, but it was real and it was growing. Vivian began bidding on larger commercial projects. Not massive commissions, not yet, but respectable mid-sized buildings that would establish Cross Architectural as a serious player. And slowly, incrementally, she started winning those bids. Each victory was sweet. Each client who chose innovation over an established name was validation. Each time an architecture publication mentioned Cross Architectural's fresh approach, Vivian felt the future she was building become more solid, more real. And then came the announcement that would change everything. New York City was soliciting proposals for the Bryant Park Innovation Center, a $50 million public architecture project that would reshape one of Manhattan's most beloved spaces. The biggest commission in the city in a decade. The kind of project that would define an architect's career. 10 firms were invited to submit proposals. Ashford and Sterling Development was on the list, the presumed favorite based on their reputation and connections. Cross Architectural Innovations was also invited, the dark horse, the emerging firm that had been making waves with innovative designs. For the first time since Damien had destroyed her career, Vivian would compete directly against him. Not in small Brooklyn projects he'd never notice, but on the biggest stage in Manhattan architecture. A public competition where the entire industry would judge whose vision was superior. Vivian assembled her best team. They spent 4 months on the proposal, working nights and weekends, pushing every boundary they could imagine. This wasn't just another commission. This was Vivian's chance to prove publicly and undeniably that she was the superior architect. The design she created was everything Damien's recent work wasn't. Bold where he played it safe. Innovative where he relied on classical principles. Community-focused where he emphasized prestige. She designed a space that would serve all New Yorkers, not just the elite. A building that incorporated green technology and sustainable materials while remaining beautiful and welcoming. It was personal. Every line of that design was Vivian, declaring that she was better than the man who'd thrown her away. That she'd always been the real genius behind Ashford Development's success. That his biggest mistake was believing he could succeed without her. The presentation day arrived with all the pressure of a championship game. Vivian stood before the city commission, her design displayed on massive screens, her team arranged behind her in a show of unified vision. Across the room, Damien presented the Ashford and Sterling proposal. It was elegant, classical, safe. The kind of design that would look impressive but break no new ground. Exactly what Vivian expected from someone who'd been coasting on her old innovations for years. The commissioners asked tough questions about sustainability, accessibility, community impact, long-term maintenance. Vivian answered with the confidence of someone who'd thought through every detail, every implication, every possibility. Damien answered with polish and prestige, leaning heavily on Ashford and Sterling's reputation rather than the specific merits of his design. 2 weeks later, The decision was announced at a press conference covered by every major architecture publication. Vivian stood backstage, her heart pounding, knowing that this moment would define everything that came next. The commission chairs stepped to the podium. After careful consideration of all proposals, we've selected the design that best represents the future of public architecture in New York City. The Bryant Park Innovation Center will be designed by Cross Architectural Innovations. The room erupted in camera flashes and excited murmurs. Vivian walked onto the stage, shaking hands with commissioners, smiling for photographers, feeling the weight of 5 years of struggle lifting from her shoulders. She'd done it. She'd beaten Damien Ashford at the highest level of their profession. She'd proven that innovation trumped reputation, that real talent couldn't be erased, that the woman he'd called not good enough was actually better than he could ever hope to be. In the audience, Vivian caught sight of Damien. His expression was carefully controlled, professionally gracious in defeat, but she could see the tightness around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He was devastated, and he still had no idea that Vivian Cross, the architect who just humiliated him publicly, was the same woman he'd discarded 5 years ago. But he was about to find out. The architecture press exploded with coverage of the Bryant Park decision. Within hours, Vivian's photo was everywhere. Industry blogs, design magazines, social media feeds. The emerging architect who'd beaten the established powerhouse. The fresh vision that had triumphed over old money and connections. And then someone started digging into her background. It began innocuously enough. A junior reporter at Architecture Digest doing research for a profile piece. She'd found Vivian's Columbia records, noticed the gap between graduation and the founding of Cross Architectural, started asking questions about those missing years. Then she found the marriage certificate. Vivian Cross had been Vivian Ashford. She'd been married to Damien Ashford. She'd worked at Ashford Development for 8 years before the divorce. The story broke 3 days after the Bryant Park announcement. Former Ashford Development employee beats her ex-husband's firm for major commission. The headline screamed across every architecture publication in the country. Vivian's phone exploded with interview requests. Her office was besieged by reporters. The architecture world, which had been impressed by Cross Architectural's victory, was now ravenous for the personal drama behind it. Nora had burst into Vivian's office, tablet in hand, her expression somewhere between concern and vindication. It's everywhere, Viv. Every major publication is running the story. They're digging into your marriage, the divorce, your time at Ashford Development. Vivian stared at the headlines scrolling across Nora's screen. She'd known this moment would come eventually. The truth was too juicy, too dramatic for the press to ignore once they started investigating. But she'd hoped to control the narrative, to reveal her connection to Damien on her own terms. What are they saying? Nora scrolled through articles. Most of it's speculation right now. Questions about what role you played at Ashford Development, whether you contributed to their award-winning designs, why you left. There's a lot of comparison between old Ashford work and your current projects, people noting the stylistic similarities. Are they mentioning the non-disclosure agreement? Not yet. But Vivian, you know they'll find it eventually. Divorce records are public. Someone will pull the settlement documents and see that you signed an NDA about your contributions to the company. Vivian stood and walked to her office windows, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, Damien was dealing with his own version of this crisis. His ex-wife, the woman he'd dismissed as just an employee, had not only beaten him publicly, but was now the center of an industry-wide conversation about who really deserved credit for Ashford Development's past success. I need to make a statement. Are you sure? Once you start talking, the NDA. The NDA prevents me from claiming credit for specific Ashford Development designs. It doesn't prevent me from acknowledging I worked there or discussing my general role. Vivian turned back to Nora. I won't violate the legal terms, but I also won't let Damien control this narrative anymore. What are you going to say? The truth. As much of it as I legally can. Vivian gave one interview, just one, to Architectural Digest, the most respected publication in the industry. She sat across from the reporter, a woman named Catherine Mills who had a reputation for tough but fair journalism, and she told her story. I met Damien Ashford in my final year at Columbia. I joined his family's firm as a junior architect and we fell in love. We got married, we worked together for 8 years, and then we got divorced. Those are the facts. Catherine leaned forward. But what was your role at Ashford Development? The designs that made that firm famous, did you contribute to those? I was part of the creative team, yes. I can't speak to specific projects because of the terms of my divorce settlement, but I will say that during my time there, I learned an enormous amount about architecture, about innovation, about pushing boundaries. The education informs everything I do now at Cross Architectural. People are saying that your current work is stylistically very similar to Ashford Development's output from 5 to 8 years ago. Before the divorce, Vivian had smiled carefully, strategically. I think what people are noticing is that my design philosophy has been consistent. Whether that philosophy was expressed through Ashford Development or through Cross Architectural, the core principles remain the same. Innovation, sustainability, human-centered design. Those values don't change based on whose name is on the door. Did Damien Ashford support your decision to start your own firm? My ex-husband and I have very different perspectives on many things. That's why we're no longer married. Do you think the Bryant Park Commission should have gone to Ashford and Sterling? I think the commission made the right choice. They selected the design that best served their vision for the project. That's how it should work. Merit, not reputation. The interview had run with the headline, Vivian Cross on beating her ex-husband, building her own legacy, and why innovation matters more than name recognition. It was perfect. Classy, professional, revealing just enough to make readers draw their own conclusions without violating the NDA's legal restrictions. Vivian came across as gracious and talented. Damien, by implication, came across as someone who might have been taking credit for work he hadn't done alone. The architecture community's response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for Vivian. Young architects, especially women, shared the article with comments about being undervalued and uncredited. Hashtag Vivian Cross trended for 3 days. Architecture historians began pulling old Ashford Development projects, comparing them to Cross Architectural's recent work. The stylistic similarities were undeniable. The innovative problem-solving, the sustainable material choices, the human-centered approach. It was all there in the old work, and it was all present in Vivian's new designs. People started asking uncomfortable questions. If Vivian Cross's design philosophy was so consistent, and if Ashford Development's work had dramatically changed after her departure, what did that say about who had really been the creative force? Damien issued his own statement through a publicist. Vivian was a valued member of our team during her time at Ashford Development. I wish her continued success with her own firm. It was bland, corporate, defensive, and it made him look worse than if he'd said nothing at all. Within a week, Ashford and Sterling had lost 2 major commission bids. Clients who'd been considering their proposals suddenly went with younger, more innovative firms. The whisper campaign had started. Damien Ashford isn't the genius we thought he was. His ex-wife was the real talent all along. Vivian watched it unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She'd never wanted to destroy Damien. She'd just wanted recognition for her own work, the chance to build something that couldn't be taken from her. But the industry had made its judgment, and it wasn't in Damien's favor. 4 months after the Bryant Park announcement, Vivian finally signed the divorce papers. She met with Richard Morrison in his office, the same office where 5 years ago he'd told her she had no legal options, no way to fight back, no choice but to accept Damien's terms. "Why now?" Richard asked as she signed the final page. "You've waited almost 5 years. Why finalize it today?" "Because I don't need the connection anymore." Vivian set down the pen, feeling something release in her chest. For 5 years, Damien and I have been legally married even though we've lived completely separate lives. I kept that legal tie because it felt like, unfinished business. Proof that he hadn't completely erased me from his life. But I don't need that anymore. You've proven everything you needed to prove. I've built something real, something that's completely mine. The divorce doesn't define me anymore. Vivian stood, smoothing her skirt. I'm not Damien Ashford's ex-wife. I'm Vivian Cross, award-winning architect and founder of Cross Architectural Innovations. The marriage is just something that happened in my past, not something that determines my future. Richard had smiled. I have to tell you, Vivian, 5 years ago, when you walked out of this office without signing these papers, I thought you were making a mistake. I thought you were letting pride get in the way of practicality. But you proved me wrong. You proved everyone wrong. I proved myself right. That's all that mattered. The signed divorce papers were filed that afternoon. After 5 years of legal limbo, Vivian Cross was officially, completely, permanently free of Damien Ashford. And 2 days later, an invitation arrived at her office. Heavy cream cardstock with gold embossed lettering. You are cordially invited to the grand opening of the Meridian Tower, Manhattan's newest architectural jewel, designed by Ashford and Sterling Development. Vivian had stared at that invitation for a long time. This was Damien's newest project, his statement piece meant to reassert Ashford and Sterling's dominance after the Bryant Park loss. He was inviting her to witness his comeback. Or maybe, she thought, he didn't even know she'd be on the guest list. The Meridian Tower opening was the social event of the season. Everyone in the industry would be there. The invitations had probably gone out to every major architectural firm in the city, including hers. "Are you going to go?" Nora had asked. And Vivian, feeling the weight of finality from those signed divorce papers, feeling the confidence of everything she'd built over 5 years, had smiled. "Yes, I think I will. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you would say to your ex if you had Vivian's success. And make sure you're subscribed because the confrontation that's coming, you won't want to miss it." The night of the Meridian Tower opening arrived with perfect autumn weather. Cool but not cold, clear skies, the kind of evening that made Manhattan feel magical. Vivian dressed carefully, deliberately. A midnight blue gown, custom made by an emerging designer she'd discovered. Simple, elegant, showing confidence without ostentation. Her hair swept up, minimal jewelry, makeup that enhanced rather than transformed. She looked in the mirror and saw someone who belonged in that world, not because she'd married into it, but because she'd earned her place through talent and determination and refusing to quit when everything seemed impossible. Nora had offered to attend with her, but Vivian had declined. This was something she needed to do alone, a closing of the circle, facing the man who tried to destroy her from a position of complete and undeniable success. The Meridian Tower's lobby was already crowded when she arrived. Manhattan's architectural elite mingling under soaring ceilings, admiring the dramatic glass installations and sleek modern design. Vivian moved through the space with an architect's eye, immediately cataloging the flaws. The acoustics were terrible. Every conversation echoed, creating a constant rumble that made it hard to hear the person next to you. The lighting created harsh shadows, unflattering and uncomfortable. The traffic flow was poorly planned, creating bottlenecks near the elevator banks and refreshment tables. These were amateur mistakes, the kind of errors Damien would never have made when Vivian had been there to catch them, to think through the practical implications of aesthetic choices, physical proof that he'd declined without her guidance. She accepted a glass of champagne from a waiter and studied the space more carefully. The glass facade would create incredible heat retention problems on the eastern. Exposure. Anyone with offices on that side of the building would roast in the afternoon sun. The structural supports were positioned in ways that would limit flexibility for future renovations. The elevator placement would create waiting time issues during rush hours. It was a beautiful building from a distance, but up close, for anyone who understood architecture, it was riddled with problems that would become obvious within months of occupancy. Vivian. The voice behind her was achingly familiar despite 5 years of silence. "I wondered if you'd actually come." She turned slowly, giving herself time to arrange her expression into polite neutrality. Damien Ashford stood 3 feet away, and the years had not been kind to him. He was still handsome, still imposing in his custom tuxedo, but there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before, stress lines that expensive skincare couldn't quite erase. He looked older than his 42 years, worn down by pressure and competition, and the weight of maintaining a reputation built on someone else's genius. "Damien." Vivian kept her voice even, professional. "Congratulations on the opening. The tower is exactly what I expected." He caught the subtle dig. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, that little tell she remembered from their marriage. The one that meant he knew he'd made a mistake but wouldn't admit it. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd want to celebrate a competitor's success. Are we competitors?" Vivian tilted her head slightly, a gesture he'd recognize. It was what she did when she was about to make a point. "I wasn't aware Ashford and Sterling had submitted a bid for the Bryant Park Commission." "We did. It was an interesting selection process. I imagine it was difficult, being rejected in favor of a relatively unknown firm." Vivian accepted another glass of champagne from a passing waiter, more for something to do with her hands than because she wanted it. "Although I suppose cross-architectural isn't quite so unknown anymore. We've won 3 major commissions in the past 6 months." "Yes, I've been following your success." The way he said it, with a mixture of admiration and regret, and something that might have been longing, made Vivian's composure waver for just a moment. She steadied herself, remembering the kitchen in the Tribeca penthouse, remembering you're not in my league, you never were. Have you? That must be strange for you. Watching the employee you dismissed become your most successful competitor. Vivian, we should talk privately. There are things I need to say to you. Are there? I can't imagine what we'd have to discuss. Our divorce was finalized last week, in case you didn't receive the notification from your attorney. Damien's eyes widened slightly. You finally signed. I did. There was no longer any reason to maintain even a legal connection between us. Before he could respond, a woman materialized at his elbow. Margot Sterling, now Margot Ashford, looked exactly as Vivian remembered from society page photos. Blonde, beautiful in a cold porcelain way, wearing a cream-colored gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She looped her arm through Damien's with practiced possessiveness. Darling, you're neglecting our guests. Margot's smile didn't reach her eyes. And you must be the ex-wife. How brave of you to come tonight. Vivian extended her hand, noting Margot's slight hesitation before accepting it. And you must be the current Mrs. Ashford. My condolences. Margot's smile froze. Excuse me. Being married to Damien must be challenging, now that he no longer has someone else's genius to rely on. Vivian's voice was honey-sweet, each word precisely calibrated to land exactly where it would hurt most. Tell me, how many of the tower's design problems have emerged since opening? I'm guessing issues with the HVAC system, acoustic problems in the lobby, and structural concerns with the eastern facade. Damien's face had gone pale. How did you? Because I know every shortcut you take when you're working without proper oversight. Every mistake you make when you think your reputation will carry you through. Vivian took a sip of champagne, savoring his discomfort. The Bryant Park Commission specifically requested innovative problem-solving in their RFP. They wanted an architect who could envision solutions, not just replicate past successes. That's why you lost. You have no idea what you're talking about. Margot's voice was sharp, defensive. Damien is a visionary. Damien is a competent architect who married his vision and then divorced her when he thought he'd learned. Enough to stand alone. Vivian's gaze never left Damien's face. How's that working out for you? Still winning commissions based on work we created together 5 years ago. What happens when the industry realizes you've been coasting on old glory? Vivian. Damien's voice was rough with emotion she couldn't quite identify. Anger, regret, desperation. Can we please talk privately? Why? So you can explain how you've struggled without me. How Margot's social connections haven't translated into architectural innovation. How every major firm in the city is buzzing about Cross Architectural's fresh approach, while Ashford and Sterling is becoming known for playing it safe. She set down her champagne glass with deliberate care. I didn't come here to gloat, Damien, though I certainly have reason to. I came here to see if you'd learned anything in 5 years, if you'd grown at all. But looking at this tower, seeing the same mistakes, the same lack of vision, I have my answer. Vivian turned to leave, but Damien caught her arm. The touch sent an unwelcome jolt through her system, muscle memory from years of intimacy that her body hadn't forgotten, even if her heart had moved on. Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She should have said no, should have walked away with her dignity intact and her victory secure. But something in his voice, a crack in the polished exterior she'd never heard before, made her pause. 5 minutes, but not here. They found privacy in an unfinished office space on the 15th floor. The room was empty, except for paint cans and drop cloths scattered across the floor. Through the windows, Manhattan sprawled in all directions, a galaxy of lights against the darkness. From this height, the city looked beautiful, full of possibility. You couldn't see the flaws from up here. I made a mistake, Damien said as soon as the door closed behind them. The biggest mistake of my life. Leaving me, you mean? Underestimating you, dismissing you, thinking that your contributions were somehow less valuable because I was the one with the family name and the industry connections. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Vivian remembered from late nights working on difficult projects. I convinced myself that I'd learned everything you had to teach me, that I could replicate your innovative thinking on my own. I was wrong. Yes. Vivian kept her voice neutral. You were. I've been watching your rise, Vivian. Every commission you've won, every boundary you've pushed, every time the industry has praised Cross Architectural for the exact kind of innovation that used to define Ashford development. Do you know what that's been like? watching you succeed and knowing that I destroyed the partnership that made me successful in the first place. I imagine it's been frustrating, though probably not as frustrating as being called just an employee after years of pouring my creativity into work someone else took credit for. Damien flinched. I was cruel. I was scared and prideful, and I lashed out in the worst possible way. Margot's family was offering connections I'd always dreamed of. She came from the world I'd always wanted to be part of, and I convinced myself that meant she was the better choice. And was she? She's beautiful, well-connected, perfect for a CEO's wife in all the superficial ways that matter to people who value those things. He met Vivian's eyes. She's also completely uninterested in architecture beyond how it affects our social standing. She doesn't understand the work, doesn't care about the innovation, doesn't see the beauty in pushing boundaries. Every conversation we have is about appearances, reputation, status. That's what you wanted 5 years ago. What I thought I wanted. What I'd been raised to believe mattered. Damien moved closer, and Vivian fought the urge to step back. Living with you, I had a partner who understood my work because she was creating it alongside me. Someone who challenged me, pushed me, made me better than I could ever be alone. I didn't appreciate that until it was gone. Damien, why are you telling me this? Vivian asked, genuine curiosity overriding her defensiveness. Do you want absolution? Forgiveness? What outcome are you hoping for from this conversation? Honestly, I don't know. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Maybe I just needed you to know that I realize what I lost. That every success you've had is proof of what we could have built together if I hadn't been so monumentally stupid. We did build something together, and then you destroyed it because you valued the wrong things. You can't undo that, Damien. No amount of regret changes what happened. I know. But, Vivian. He paused, seeming to gather courage. Is there any chance we could work together again? Not as spouses, I'm not asking for that. But as partners, your vision, my resources and connections. We could create something extraordinary. Vivian stared at him, genuinely shocked. You want to be partners again? I know it's a lot to ask. I know I have no right to ask it after what I did, but from a purely professional standpoint, we were an incredible team. Cross Architectural has the innovation, but you're still a relatively small firm. Ashford and Sterling has the resources and reputation, but we're lacking the creative edge we used to have. Together we'd be exactly what we were 5 years ago. Vivian interrupted. Me providing the genius, you taking the credit. Except this time I'd be walking into it with my eyes open, which somehow makes it worse. It wouldn't be like that. Equal partners, equal credit, everything documented and legal. Your name on everything alongside mine. For a moment, just a moment, Vivian let herself imagine it. The resources of Ashford and Sterling combined with her innovative vision, the projects they could take on, the boundaries they could push, the impact they could have on the architectural landscape. Then she remembered standing in the Tribeca kitchen, being told she was just an employee. She remembered the years of struggle, rebuilding her reputation from nothing. She remembered every small victory of the past 5 years, each one entirely hers. No. Her voice was firm, final. My answer is no. Vivian, I don't need your resources, Damien. I don't need your reputation or your connections or your family name. I've built something real on my own merit, and I'm not about to compromise that by tying myself to you again in any capacity. You're letting pride get in the way of an incredible opportunity. I'm letting self-respect guide my decisions. There's a difference. Vivian moved toward the door. Your 5 minutes are up. Wait. The desperation in his voice stopped her. Is this about revenge? Are you punishing me for what I did? Vivian turned back, studying the man she'd once loved with almost clinical detachment. You think awfully highly of yourself if you believe my career decisions revolve around you. I'm not trying to punish you, Damien. I'm simply building the life I deserve, which happens to not include you in any capacity. I still love you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Vivian felt something twist in her chest, some old wound that hadn't quite healed despite everything she'd accomplished. No, you don't. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. You love what I could do for your career. You love the idea of recapturing past glory. You might even love the challenge of winning back someone who's rejected you. But you don't love me. You never really did. That's not true. If you'd loved me, you wouldn't have dismissed my contributions as insignificant. If you'd loved me, you wouldn't have protected your reputation by erasing my role in our success. If you'd loved me, you would have fought for our marriage instead of trading it in for social advancement." She reached for the door handle. "I hope you find happiness with Margot. I genuinely do, but you won't find redemption with me." Vivian walked out of that empty office, leaving Damien surrounded by paint cans and drop cloths and the physical evidence of his declining abilities. She didn't look back, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing whether his words had affected her. She returned to the main event, moving through the crowd with renewed confidence. Other architects approached her, wanting to discuss the Bryant Park project, asking about Cross Architectural's design philosophy, treating her like the industry leader she'd become. Across the room, she could see Damien return to Margot's side. The perfect couple, smiling for the cameras, playing the role of successful Manhattan power brokers. But Vivian could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. He was trapped in the life he'd chosen, realizing too late that he'd traded everything real for something hollow. As the evening wound down, Vivian was asked to say a few words. The event organizers wanted comments from notable guests, and she was now notable enough to warrant public remarks. She accepted the microphone, looking out over the assembled architects and developers and society figures. The future of architecture belongs to those willing to take risks. Her voice carried across the lobby, clear and confident. Reputation can't replace vision. The industry doesn't need architects who play it safe. We need innovators who push boundaries, who imagine solutions that don't exist yet, who believe that buildings can change lives and communities. Every word was a subtle rejection of Damien's approach, of the safe classical designs he'd fallen back on without her innovation to guide him. But she never mentioned him by name. Didn't need to. Everyone in that room understood exactly what she was saying, and to whom. The response was enthusiastic applause. Standing ovation from the younger architects, the ones who saw in Vivian a new model for success. Not inherited reputation, but earned recognition. Not playing by old rules, but creating new possibilities. As she handed back the microphone, Vivian caught Damien's eye across the room. He was watching her with an expression of complete defeat, finally understanding that he hadn't just lost a wife 5 years ago. He'd lost his partner, his creative compass, the person who'd made him successful, and there was no getting her back. Vivian walked out of the Meridian Tower into the cool Manhattan night, feeling lighter than she had in years. The confrontation she'd been half dreading, half anticipating was over. Damien knew the truth now, knew that she'd won, that she'd beaten him at every level that mattered, and she'd done it with grace, without bitterness or cruelty, just with undeniable success that spoke louder than any revenge could have. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nora. "How did it go?" Vivian smiled as she typed her response. "It went perfectly. I'll tell you everything tomorrow." She hailed a cab, heading back to her apartment in Chelsea. Not the Tribeca penthouse she'd lost in the divorce, but a beautiful space she'd designed herself, filled with her own furniture and art and the evidence of a life built entirely on her own terms. Tomorrow she'd go back to work on the Bryant Park Innovation Center. She'd continue building Cross Architectural into the firm she'd always envisioned. She'd keep pushing boundaries and proving that innovation mattered more than reputation. But tonight, she let herself feel the satisfaction of having faced her past and walked away victorious. Damien had tried to erase her, and she'd responded by becoming so successful that he couldn't help but see her everywhere he looked. That was justice. That was victory. And it was enough. 6 months passed. 6 months during which Vivian poured herself into the Bryant Park Innovation Center, creating what she knew would be her masterpiece. The building was taking shape, rising from the ground in glass and steel and innovative sustainable materials. It was everything the Meridian Tower wasn't. Functional, beautiful, designed for actual human use rather than just aesthetic impact. Cross Architectural had expanded to 30 employees, working out of a new office space in Soho. Young, talented architects who believed in Vivian's vision, who wanted to be part of something that mattered. The firm had won 4 more major commissions in the past 6 months, each one establishing Cross Architectural as a force in the industry. Meanwhile, Ashford and Sterling was struggling. The Meridian Tower had all the problems Vivian had predicted. HVAC failures requiring expensive retrofitting, acoustic issues that made the lobby unusable for events, structural concerns with the eastern facade that were going to cost millions to address. The building had become known in the industry as a beautiful failure, impressive from a distance but fatally flawed up close. Two major clients had pulled out of contracts with Ashford and Sterling, citing concerns about quality and innovation. Damien's firm was still successful by most measures, still winning commissions, but the decline was obvious to anyone paying attention. They were coasting on old reputation while younger firms passed them by. Vivian watched it happen with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She'd never wanted to destroy Damien. She just wanted the recognition she deserved, the chance to build something that couldn't be taken from her. But the industry had rendered its verdict, and it was clear who the real talent had always been. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Vivian received an email that would change everything. The subject line read, Pritzker Prize nomination. The Pritzker Architecture Prize was the highest honor in the field, often called the Nobel Prize of Architecture. It was given annually to a living architect whose built work demonstrated talent, vision, and commitment to humanity. Winners were selected by an international jury and received global recognition as the best in the profession. Vivian had been nominated for the totality of her work, both recent projects and, the nomination letter carefully noted, for design innovations that had influenced the field over the past decade. That last phrase was significant. The jury was acknowledging that Vivian's influence extended beyond just cross-architectural's work, that her design philosophy, her innovative approach, had been shaping architecture, even when her name wasn't publicly attached to it. It was as close as anyone could come to officially recognizing that she'd been the creative force behind Ashford Development's success without explicitly saying so. The nomination process was rigorous. Site visits to her completed projects, interviews with clients and colleagues, detailed review of her design philosophy and approach. Vivian spent 3 months being scrutinized by the Pritzker jury, answering questions about her work, explaining her vision for architecture's future. And then, on a spring morning 8 months after the Meridian Tower opening, the announcement came. Vivian Cross was the newest Pritzker Prize laureate, the youngest woman ever to receive the honor. The architecture world exploded with congratulations and celebration. Vivian's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages flooded in from colleagues, clients, former professors, people she hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted to celebrate her achievement, to associate themselves with her success. The awards ceremony was scheduled for 2 months later at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The entire industry would be there. Every major architect, every significant firm, everyone who mattered in the field, including Damien Ashford. Vivian sat in her office, holding the Pritzker notification letter, feeling the weight of complete vindication settling over her. 5 years ago, Damien had told her she wasn't in his league, that she was talented but would never achieve the kind of success he took for granted. And now she'd won the most prestigious award in their profession. An award Damien had been nominated for twice and passed over both times. An award that declared her the best architect in the world. She thought about calling him, about rubbing his face in her victory. But that wasn't who she was. She'd won by being better, not by being cruel. Her success spoke for itself. No gloating necessary. Instead, she called her team together, gathered the 30 people who'd believed in cross-architectural, who'd worked nights and weekends to bring her visions to life, who'd been part of this incredible journey. We won. She stood in the center of their Soho office, surrounded by people who felt like family. The Pritzker Prize. We won. The celebration that followed was joyous and genuine. These people had earned this victory alongside her. They'd taken risks on an emerging firm, believed in innovation over reputation, proven that doing great work mattered more than playing it safe. As the celebration wound down, Nora pulled Vivian aside. How does it feel? Vivian looked around the office, at the talented people she'd assembled, at the evidence of success on every wall. It feels like I finally proved everything I needed to prove. That woman Damien called not good enough just won the highest honor in our profession. That employee he dismissed is now recognized as the best in the world at what she does. Are you going to rub it in his face at the ceremony? I don't need to. Vivian smiled. My success does that without me saying a word. The night of the Pritzker Prize ceremony arrived with all the glamour and prestige of the Oscars. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed into an architectural showcase. Display screens showed Vivian's projects from every angle. The Bryant Park Innovation Center, nearly complete and already being called a masterpiece. The Brooklyn boutique hotel that had launched her career. The residential projects that had established her reputation. Vivian wore a custom gown in deep emerald green, designed by the same emerging designer who'd made her Meridian Tower dress. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, her makeup perfect. She looked like someone who belonged on this stage. accepting this honor. She sat at a table with her cross-architectural team, these people who'd become her chosen family. Around the room were the titans of architecture, legends whose work she'd studied in school, rising stars who were reshaping the field. Everyone who mattered gathered to celebrate excellence. And at a table near the back, Damien Ashford sat with Margot. He was applauding politely as various awards were presented, but Vivian could see the strain on his face. Being here, watching his ex-wife receive an honor he'd coveted, had to be excruciating. For a moment, Vivian felt something almost like pity. Then she remembered just an employee, and the feeling passed. The Pritzker Prize was always presented last, the evening's final and most prestigious honor. When the jury chairman approached the podium to make the announcement, the room went completely silent. The Pritzker Architecture Prize recognizes architectural talent, vision, and commitment to humanity. This year's laureate has demonstrated all three qualities in abundance. Her work pushes boundaries while remaining deeply human. She innovates without losing sight of function. She creates beauty that serves purpose. The chairman went on to detail Vivian's achievements, her sustainable design innovations, her human-centered approach to public spaces, her commitment to mentoring young architects, especially women, her influence on the field that extended beyond her own firm's projects. That last point was emphasized, her influence on the field. Everyone in that room knew what it meant, that Vivian's impact predated cross-architectural, that her design philosophy had been shaping architecture even when her name wasn't on the work. It was the closest thing to a public acknowledgement that she'd been the real genius behind Ashford Development's success. When Vivian's name was announced as the winner, the ovation was thunderous. A full 3 minutes of standing applause. She walked to the stage with tears threatening, feeling the weight of every struggle, every setback, every moment she'd wanted to quit but pushed forward anyway. She accepted the bronze medallion and $100,000 grant that came with the Pritzker Prize. She stood at the podium, looking out over the assembled architects, feeling the full magnitude of what she'd accomplished. "Thank you." Her voice was steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "This honor means everything to me, not just because it's recognition of my work, but because of what it represents. A belief that innovation matters, that pushing boundaries is worth the risk, that architecture can and should make people's lives better." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I want to dedicate this award to everyone who's been told they're not enough, everyone who's had their contributions dismissed or stolen, everyone who's been underestimated because they don't fit someone else's definition of success. Your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it. Your value isn't diminished because someone failed to appreciate it. Keep creating, keep innovating, keep believing in your vision even when others can't see it." The applause was deafening. People were on their feet again, many with tears in their eyes. Young architects, especially women, who heard in Vivian's words their own stories of being overlooked and underestimated. As Vivian left the stage, she passed Damien's table. Their eyes met for just a moment. He was clapping, and the look on his face was pure anguish. Pride at her achievement mixed with devastating awareness of what he'd lost. In that moment, Vivian felt the last remnant of anger dissolve. He'd wounded her deeply, but that wound had forged her into someone stronger than she ever could have been with him. She'd needed to be broken to discover just how powerful she could become. Later, after the formal ceremony ended, Vivian found herself surrounded by well-wishers and admirers. A young woman, maybe 25, approached nervously. "Ms. Cross, I just graduated from architecture school. I read about what happened with your ex-husband, how he tried to erase your contributions. My boyfriend keeps taking credit for my designs, and I was thinking about letting it go because I love him and I don't want to seem difficult. But seeing you here tonight, it made me realize I deserve better." Vivian took the young woman's hands. "You do deserve better, and you're capable of more than you can imagine. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Not your boyfriend, not your professors, not anyone. Your talent belongs to you. Make sure your name is on your work. Make sure you get credit for what you create. Don't make my mistakes." The young woman left with renewed determination, and Vivian felt a sense of purpose beyond her own success. She wasn't just winning for herself. She was changing the industry, making it safer for the next generation of talented women to get the recognition they deserved. Nora appeared with champagne and a triumphant grin. "How does it feel, being the best architect in the world while your ex-husband's firm struggles to land mid-tier commissions?" "It feels earned. Every step of this journey, every success, every boundary pushed, I did it myself. No one can take that from me. He's watching you again. I know. This time, Vivian didn't bother looking back. But I'm done living my life in response to Damien Ashford's choices. This success isn't about him. It never was. She raised her glass to the room, to her future, to the brilliant young architects who would follow in her footsteps and refuse to be diminished. That night, after the celebration ended, Vivian returned to her apartment. On her desk was a handwritten note that had been delivered during the ceremony. Vivian, watching you tonight, I finally understood what I was too blind to see 5 years ago. You were never the one who needed me. I was the one who needed you. You've become everything I knew you could be, and I'm sorry I wasn't wise enough to be there for the journey. I hope you build 1,000 buildings that change the skyline. I hope every one of them bears your name. And I hope that someday you'll think of me without pain. Damien. Vivian read the note twice, then placed it in her desk drawer. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement, the closing of a chapter that had defined too many years of her life. She turned to the windows of her apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Damien was returning to his life with Margot, to his struggling firm, to the consequences of valuing the wrong things. But here, in her own space filled with her own achievements, Vivian Cross was free. She had been dismissed, betrayed, told she wasn't good enough for the world she'd helped create. And she had responded by building an empire that proved every single doubt wrong. 1 year later, the Bryant Park Innovation Center stood complete, a gleaming testament to Vivian's vision. The building had exceeded every expectation, sustainable, beautiful, functional in ways that made people's daily lives better. It incorporated green technology that reduced energy costs by 40%. It created flexible public spaces that served all New Yorkers, not just the elite. It was already being called one of the most important architectural achievements of the decade. The grand opening drew thousands. City officials, architecture critics, community members who had actually used the space. Vivian stood at the podium, looking out over the crowd, feeling the weight of complete satisfaction. This building represents what architecture can be when we prioritize people over prestige, innovation over reputation, purpose over profit. It exists because a commission was willing to take a chance on a new vision instead of relying on an old name. I hope it inspires others to do the same. The ovation was heartfelt and genuine. This wasn't just industry recognition. This was community appreciation for something that would genuinely improve lives. After the ceremony, as Vivian toured the building with journalists and critics, she noticed Damien standing at the edge of the crowd. He wasn't there in any official capacity. Ashford and Sterling hadn't been involved in the project at all. He'd come simply to see what she'd created, to witness the manifestation of the vision he'd once dismissed. Their eyes met across the lobby. Vivian felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even curiosity. Just the neutral acknowledgement of someone who'd once been important but wasn't anymore. Damien raised his hand in a small wave. A gesture of congratulation, perhaps, or simple acknowledgement of her complete victory. Vivian nodded once, then turned back to the journalist asking her questions about sustainable design. She had more important things to focus on than ghosts from her past. Later that evening, Vivian learned through industry gossip that Damien and Margot were divorcing. The marriage had been strained for years, apparently. Margot had left him when Ashford and Sterling's financial difficulties became serious enough to threaten their lifestyle. She'd found someone wealthier, someone more connected, someone whose reputation wasn't tarnished by obvious decline. Vivian felt a moment of sympathy for Damien, understanding now what it felt like to be valued only for what you could provide, to be discarded when you were no longer useful. But the feeling passed quickly. He'd chosen that life. He'd valued those superficial things. He was simply experiencing the consequences of his own priorities. Cross Architectural continued to grow. Vivian took on an ambitious project in Singapore, another in Dubai. Her firm became known globally, not just in Manhattan. Young architects competed for positions on her team. Universities invited her to give lectures. Her design philosophy was taught in architecture schools around the world. And through it all, Vivian maintained her commitment to mentoring, to lifting up the next generation, to making sure talented people got credit for their work. She'd started a scholarship program for architecture students from non-traditional backgrounds. She'd implemented transparent crediting practices at Cross Architectural that ensured every team member's contributions were documented and recognized. She was changing the industry, making it better, ensuring that what happened to her wouldn't happen to others. 3 years after winning the Pritzker Prize, Vivienne gave a TED Talk about success, betrayal, and building from nothing. She told her story publicly for the first time, not naming Damien, but being honest about having her work stolen, her contributions erased, her career nearly destroyed by someone who was supposed to love her. The talk went viral, millions of views, thousands of comments from people who'd experienced similar betrayals in their own fields. It struck a chord far beyond architecture, resonating with anyone who'd ever been underestimated or undervalued. "The greatest revenge isn't destruction," Vivienne said in the closing moments of her talk. "It's success so complete, so undeniable, that it requires no explanation or justification. It's building something so magnificent that the person who tried to erase you can only watch from the sidelines, finally understanding the magnitude of what they lost." She paused, looking out over the audience. "I was broken and dismissed and told I wasn't enough. And I responded by becoming the best in the world at what I do. That's not revenge, that's justice. And it's available to anyone willing to do the work, to believe in themselves when no one else does, to refuse to accept someone else's assessment of their worth." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. "Now, before we wrap this up, I need you to do something for me. If this story moved you, if Vivienne's journey inspired you, hit that subscribe button right now. Click the notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. And drop a comment telling me about a time someone underestimated you. What did you do? How did you prove them wrong? I read every single comment, and I want to hear your victories. And smash that like button if you believe the best revenge is living well. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. 5 years after the Bryant Park Innovation Center opening, Vivienne Cross stood in her office overlooking Manhattan. She was 46 years old, at the absolute peak of her career. Cross Architectural had offices in New York, London, and Tokyo. They employed over 100 people. They'd won every major award in the field. Vivienne herself had been featured in Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People. She'd given commencement speeches at Columbia and Harvard. She'd published a book about architectural innovation that had become required reading in design schools. She'd built an empire, a real one, based on genuine talent and hard work and refusing to quit when everything seemed impossible. And she'd done it completely on her own terms. Through the windows, she could see several buildings she'd designed. They changed the Manhattan skyline, made the city more beautiful and functional and sustainable. Each one bore her name. Each one was undeniably, permanently hers. Her phone buzzed with a text from someone she'd started dating. Michael Chen, a structural engineer she'd met on a project 2 years ago. Someone who respected her work, admired her success, saw her as an equal partner in every sense. Someone who would never dream of taking credit for her achievements because he had his own accomplishments to be proud of. They were taking it slow, building something real rather than rushing into commitment. Vivienne had learned that lesson thoroughly. Love on her terms this time. Partnership with someone who understood what that word actually meant. Looking out over the city she'd helped shape, Vivienne thought about the woman she'd been 10 years ago. Standing in a Tribeca kitchen, being told she wasn't good enough. Believing for just a moment that maybe Damien was right, that maybe she really didn't belong in his world. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different life, a different universe. Vivienne had been broken down to nothing and rebuilt herself into something extraordinary. Not in spite of what Damien had done to her, but in some ways because of it. She'd needed to lose everything to discover what she was truly capable of creating. The intercom on her desk buzzed. "Miss Cross, you have a visitor, a Mr. Damien Ashford. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." Vivienne felt a flicker of curiosity. She hadn't seen Damien in person in over 3 years. Hadn't thought about him in months. He'd become completely irrelevant to her life, just someone who used to matter but didn't anymore. "Send him in." Damien entered her office looking diminished. Still handsome, still well-dressed, but there was a weariness about him that went deeper than age. He was 49 now, and he looked every year of it plus a few more. "Vivienne, thank you for seeing me. You said it was important." Vivienne gestured to the chairs facing her desk, not bothering to stand or move from behind her position of power. Damien sat, looking around the office, taking in the awards on the shelves, the magazine covers on the walls, the architectural models of projects spanning the globe. "You've built something incredible." "Yes, I have. I wanted to come here and say this in person. I'm sorry for everything I did to you, every way I hurt you, dismissed you, tried to erase you. You deserved so much better than how I treated you." Vivian studied him with detached curiosity. "What do you want me to say, Damien? That I forgive you, that it's all in the past, that we can be friends now that enough time has passed. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I destroyed, what I lost. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid and arrogant to see it." "That's probably true." Damien winced at her matter-of-fact agreement. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Leaving you was the biggest one. And what do you want me to do with that information?" Vivian's voice was gentle but firm. "Do you want me to feel sorry for you? To tell you it's okay, you didn't know any better? To give you absolution so you can feel less guilty about the choices you made? I want you to know that I see you now. Really see you. Everything you've accomplished, everything you've become. You're extraordinary, Vivian. I've always been extraordinary, Damien. You just couldn't see it because you were too busy looking at yourself." The words landed like a slap. Damien sat back in his chair, absorbing them. "You're right. I was so focused on my family's legacy, on maintaining my reputation, on proving I was worthy of the Ashford name, that I couldn't see the actual genius standing right next to me. By the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late." "Yes, it was. Is there any chance?" Damien started, then stopped. "Any possibility that we could?" "No." Vivian's voice was firm and final. "There's no possibility of anything between us, Damien. No partnership, no friendship, no closure or redemption or whatever you came here looking for. You destroyed what we had, and it can't be rebuilt. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. I understand. I hope you do, because I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really hear it." Vivian leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "What you did to me, trying to erase my contributions, taking credit for my work, throwing me away when you thought you'd learned everything I had to teach, that was the worst thing anyone has ever done to me. It nearly destroyed me. There were nights I wanted to give up, to accept that maybe you were right and I really wasn't good enough. Vivian. But I didn't give up. I chose to fight, to rebuild, to prove that my worth wasn't dependent on your recognition. And I won, Damien. I beat you at every level that matters. I'm more successful, more respected, more influential than you'll ever be. That's not arrogance. It's just fact. I know. So when you sit there and tell me you're sorry, that you realize what you lost, that you see me now, it means nothing to me. Your opinion stopped mattering years ago. You don't get to validate me after trying to erase me. You don't get to feel better by apologizing for something unforgivable. Then why did you agree to see me? Because I wanted to look you in the eye and know that I feel nothing. No anger, no bitterness, no desire for revenge. You're just someone who used to be important but isn't anymore. Seeing you confirms that I've completely moved past what you did. Damien stood slowly, understanding that the conversation was over. For what it's worth, I am proud of what you've built. Even if I have no right to feel that way. You're right, you don't. After Damien left, Vivian sat in her office for a long moment, processing the conversation. She'd told him the truth. She felt nothing. The man who'd once been her entire world was now just a stranger who'd briefly intersected with her life. She'd won. Not just professionally, but emotionally. She'd healed from what he'd done, built something better than what they'd had together, moved forward into a future where he was completely irrelevant. That was the ultimate victory. Not making him suffer, but making him meaningless. Vivian turned back to her work, to the exciting project in Singapore that was pushing boundaries in sustainable design, to the mentorship program she was developing for young architects, to the life she'd built that was full and meaningful and entirely her own. Damien Ashford had tried to erase her from the story of her own success, and Vivian Cross had responded by writing a new story so magnificent that his chapter became a footnote. She'd been dismissed as not good enough. She'd become the best in the world. She'd been told she didn't belong in his league. She'd created a league of her own where she set the standards everyone else tried to meet. That was how you won. Not with anger or bitterness or revenge, but by becoming so successful, so undeniable, so completely self-made, that the person who tried to destroy you could only watch from the sidelines and finally understand what they'd lost. And that, Vivian thought as she returned to her designs, was the sweetest victory of all. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for being here. Stories like Vivian's remind us that being underestimated isn't the end. It's just the beginning of proving everyone wrong. If this resonated with you, subscribe to this channel for more incredible stories of people who refuse to stay down. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by who recognizes it. And tell me in the comments what you're building that will prove your doubters wrong. I believe in you, and I can't wait to hear your success story. Until next time, remember that the best response to being dismissed is becoming undismissible.